Okay, so good morning. We'll start. So this is exciting. A new topic. A new sefer. Um, Touching a City's Soul. Beaker Chicago. Kuntra Speaker Chicago. So actually, this is also from the previous Rebbe, and it's very connected to Chicago. So that's why it's exciting for us. Who most of us are in Chicago, to be able to learn it together. It's a very exciting opportunity. And we're going to start. Well, I think we should read the publisher's foreword together, because it really gives a lot of background to the Sefer. Um, and we probably don't need to read the entire thing, but I think that it gives us a flavor and a background. So this is actually a compilation. This Sefer Beaker Chicago is not one long mimer. It's actually a compilation of many talks that the previous Rebbe gave over the course of the time that he was connected to the idea of visiting Chicago. It's actually a couple of weeks worth, over a couple of weeks of different talks and things that he had said in connection to the visit to Chicago. And if we start from the publisher's forward, I'll just read together. It says, it's hard, almost impossible today to picture how American Jews felt in the early 1940s. They saw themselves at crossroads with many different paths open to them. Remember, this is right after the Holocaust, or I should say in the middle of the Holocaust, really. And American Jews, some had relatives in Europe, some had just come from Europe and were managed to escape. So by and large, they remembered where they came from. In Eastern Europe, the warmth, joy, and deep roots of their Jewish heritage had left an indelible mark on their personality. But America was changing. Learning a new language was hard, making ends meet and finding a job, especially one that did not require working on Shabbos, even more difficult. And that, I think, many of you probably had relatives who maybe talked about that time where it was very hard for people, even people who are keeping Shabbos in Europe. Many people, right, like the image of like throwing the tefillin overboard or deciding that they're not keeping Shabbos once they got here, or people working all week and getting a job and then being fired on Friday because they weren't going to work on Shabbos. There was a lot of things like that happening. Moreover, the challenges did not only come from external circumstances. In Europe, the local population had made sure that Jews remained conscious of their religious identity, of course, that through the Holocaust and so forth. And through Stalin and all the terrible things that were going on in communist Russia. By contrast, in the US, a melting pot mentality prevailed. American Jews felt that all the doors to success could be open for them. All that was necessary was to be like everyone else, right? The power, the lure of assimilation. Furthermore, they had to battle sadness and despair. They knew of the horrors of their brethren, and for some, their family members were suffering in Europe, and that saddled them with a heavy inner burden. In this environment, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, known as the Frierdiker Rebbe, or the previous Rebbe, sounded his clarion call: America is nicht anders. A Jew in America should live no differently than he lived in Europe. America is nicht anders means America is not different. And that was really when the previous Rebbe came over in 1940. He himself, having escaped, he was in the Warsaw Ghetto, escaping Warsaw Ghetto, having lost a daughter to the Nazis in Treblinka and a son-in-law. I mean, he was no stranger to the horrors of the war. When he came to America and he said, America is no different, at first glance, it could seem to be quite a funny statement. I mean, America was very different. That's why he was able to get here and live as a Jew openly and safely. So America was very different. But what he was referring to was America is no different when it comes to Torah mitzvahs. Torah and mitzvahs apply in all generations, in all times, in all years, and in all lands, any place in the world, right? Torah was the blueprint from which Hashem created the world. So it applies everywhere. And what he was saying was that it's no different. We needed to be Jews in Europe, and we need to be Jews in America. We're servers of Hashem in Europe, and we're servers of Hashem in America. And he set out literally to create that environment in America that would be warm and welcoming and encouraging the Jewish nation to keep Torah mitzvahs as beautifully as they had been keeping it in Europe for generations. Arriving in America in 1940 from Warsaw, broken in body from the Soviet persecution, and having witnessed firsthand the Nazi conquest of Poland, the Rebbe rallied American Jews to a reawakening of pride in their heritage. With a firm and vigorous spirit, he inspired them to strengthen their study of the Torah and the observance of its mitzvahs and to provide authentic Jewish education for their children. His very main thrust of his was education, because he felt, as there's a statement, if there's no baby kids, there's no adult goats. That we have to make sure that there is education, proper Jewish education. You'll see that in some of the speeches that are published in this work, that he very, very strongly spoke about the importance of proper Jewish education by proper God-fearing teachers and proper Torah sources, so that an education of Jews could grow up literate in their Torah heritage. He spoke a lot about keeping mitzvahs here anyway. And one of the first things that he established when he came here was a yeshiva, was a printing house, so that they could print authentic Jewish books in Hebrew and in English, so that the English-speaking crowd could learn properly, and yeshiva systems, set up yeshiva systems in different major cities across America. The Rebbe Rayatz, that this is the way he's referred to, Rayatz is the Rashi Tevos, is the first letter, is an acronym of his name, Rav Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. Like if you take the first letters, it spells Rayatz, and so sometimes he's referred to as the Friediger Rebbe, which means the previous Rebbe, or the previous Rebbe if you're speaking in English, or the Rebbe Rayatz, which is the acronym for his name. So the Rebbe Rayatz had visited the U.S. previously in 1929, 1930, and then he had journeyed across the continent, speaking in a large number of Jewish communities. However, when he arrived in the U.S. the second time, his health prevented him from doing so. Instead, he remained in New York and sparked a revival of Jewish practice and awareness by sending shluchim, emissaries, to outlying communities. Nevertheless, and this is what makes this work so really very, very special, is that nevertheless, in 1942, he made an exception and visited Chicago. So we're one of the very few cities that the previous Rebbe visited after he moved to America. He had, again, made a visit in 1929. That was before his incarceration and when he was stronger. When he visited America, and he also visited Eretz Yisrael at that time. But when he moved here, this was an exception, that he came to Chicago. There were a significant number of Lubavitcher Hasidim in the city, and they had played an important role morally and materially in the rescue of the Rebbe from Warsaw, where he had been located during the Nazi invasion of Poland. They were very eager to host the Rebbe in their city, and after almost 2 years of entreaties, because he came here in 1940, and this is 1942, the Rebbe acquiesced to their request. The expressed goal of the Rebbe's visit was to raise funds for the Central Lubavitch Yeshiva in Brooklyn and its branches. However, the Rebbe clearly stated there was a further purpose for his visit. And these are words of the previous Rebbe, and they are also later on in the book. 12 years ago, during my visit with you in Chicago, I told you that I had come not only to take money for our brethren in Europe, but also to give. For that has been my life's mission throughout years of work in the cause of God-fearing Torah study and kosher schooling. And now divine providence has brought me all the way to America with a specific mission for the above causes. The previous Rebbe viewed himself as the fact that he came out of Europe, that he had a mission that he had to accomplish. Hashem allowed him out of Europe and into America because he had a specific purpose to accomplish. And he said about with a lot of alacrity, for somebody who was not well physically and spiritually, very broken about what was going on in Europe with the Jews, he did not sit and rest, not even for one night, when he came to America, and worked tirelessly for the next 10 years until his passing. His words were accentuated with a powerful sense of personal responsibility. I arrived in America, like all the Rabbanim who have now arrived in America, not because we earned and deserved the privilege of having God save us from the tyrant's blood-stained hands. Rather, God dispatched us here with a dual mission to American Jewry and their Rabbanim and lay leaders. The first mission is to urge them all to do whatever possible to sustain and save the Jews abroad from sinking. I was there with them for 3 months in the ghetto and witnessed the horrendous situation in general and of Jews in particular. Intensified support must be organized energetically to provide food on the spot and to increase the possibilities for immigration. The second mission which Divine Providence has placed upon me is the furtherance of God-fearing Torah study and kosher schooling here in this country. And he set about with alacrity to both of them, to both of those causes. And I mean, just look at the humble way that he's saying, we didn't get to come to America because of any earned or deserved privilege. We came here because Hashem expects us to do something by coming here. And I think in general that sense of mission and purpose was something that the Rebbe imparted to his Hasidim in general as well, our Rebbe, the next generation, that, you know, it's about a mission statement. Like, we have a mission statement, we have something to accomplish here, and we need to accomplish it. And in passion, Adin Steinsaltz said it very beautifully when he said the Rebbe did not leave a legacy; he left marching orders. It's one of my favorite lines. An impassioned outcry. When speaking to the community and its leaders, he did not mince words. That is for sure true. As we're going to see in these pages, he is very stern. It was such a man of chesed, and he spoke very sternly to the rabbis of the communities, like, you need to shape up so that the communities could get what they need, basically. It was like very encouraging and also demanding. He spoke from the heart, crying out for the local Jewish leaders, to reorient the direction of Jewish life as a whole and Jewish education in particular. As one of the speakers expressed it just now, the Jewish street is in ruins, the Jewish homes are shattered. That statement is no mere figure of speech. Sadly, it is a valid description of the state of affairs. Moreover, as the speakers themselves have said, the situation is deteriorating. The Rebbe did not merely lament the prevailing circumstances, quite the contrary. His primary focus was on correcting the situation. The foundation on which everything depends is missing. Basically, the entire religious state of the Jewish people depends on the nature of the education and guidance provided by the Cheder, the Talmud Torah, and the Yeshiva. First of all, the educational scene must be cleared of unclean disbelievers. Educational boards should likewise be in the hands of God-fearing individuals who are willing and able to cleanse the Talmud Torah schools of the active impurity of faithless principles, teachers, and books, and in some cases even non-Jewish teachers, right? Like, it was very, very clear that if the education was going to be imparting misinformation, then that's not a good education. We need to make sure that the education is true to Torah values. Unfortunately, we know that there were a lot of people who really turned off to Torah and Yiddishkeit because of some of the things that they heard, quote unquote, in Hebrew schools over the years, right? And that's a very sad thing, because they missed out on the truth of their heritage, right? Like, my husband's, run into people that, like, people have turned to other faiths even, and God forbid, and they say, oh, you know what these faiths have? They have unbelievable things. They have the books of Joshua and Isaiah, and they have all the, it's like, one second here. These are part of Torah. Those are our books. They may be misquoted by other religions, but this is Torah. This is the 24 books of the written Torah. People have no idea. Or about the Jewish holidays, people have no idea. There was a lot of lack of information and also misinformation, unfortunately. And the Rebbe saw that happening in 1940 and wanted to clarify that the education needs to be accurate, true, and then people will their neshamas will hear it and they will be drawn to it. Awakening.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Did he go to the conservative movement and reform movement, or stick mostly with, because at that time in New York, that was,
people came to him. Happening. People came to him. His statements were made publicly to anybody who would listen. So I was in touch with, I'm sure, whoever was willing to be in touch with him, just as the Rebbe was, right? But the people who would come to him were not necessarily always the people who were trying to change the course of Judaism in a different direction. They didn't necessarily want to hear that message. There was an agenda. It wasn't only out of ignorance, right? There was also an agenda on certain parts of certain people at that time. So, I don't know that everybody heard his message, but as many people as heard his message, heard it, and look at the result today. I mean, look at the seeds that he planted. Look what blossomed from in Chabad all over the world. I mean, basically started this, all these different systems of education in Chabad and all the shluchim that are around the world, where, the previous Rebbe started the process. The Rebbe took it to a whole nother exponential growth. But this is all from the seeds that the previous Rebbe sowed when he came to America in 1940. It certainly has reached many people who identify in different strains of Yiddishkeit at this point. And I think people hear with their soul. So truth is heard with the soul. It's like a Jewish soul can't help itself, awakening souls. Although he did speak out in such harsh, unrelenting tones, right? Not everybody wants to hear harsh, unrelenting tones. The overall impression of the Rebbe imparted is one of warmth. I mean, people would say that again and again and again. I never had the merit of meeting him. He passed away before I was born, but you can see in his smile and even in the words, you're going to see the style of the previous Rebbe's words here, even though some of it is harsh, it really has the feeling of a father speaking to his children. Like, let me share with you about life. Like, I've lived more years than you have. Let me tell you something about life, like how it works, and how it doesn't work. And that's going to be the feeling, I think, is like a very caring father who's really giving over what he can give over in the way of guidance to children. It's like a very beautiful thing. Although some of it does not mince words, as the publisher is saying here. Like, we're not going to be used to sometimes some of that saying, like even these quotes over here, right? Like, out of the hands of the disbelievers into the hands of the believers, like that's quite clear and maybe uncomfortable to hear sometimes. But he stood up to the communists and to the Nazis, and he wasn't about to be cowed by politicians in America. That wasn't going to scare him. You couldn't scare the previous Rebbe. If he had something to say that was truth, he was going to say it, and he did. And we're going to be hearing some of it as we learn this sefer. Yes, Bubby.
Was this the Rebbe that said your gun doesn't
Yes.
mean it?
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. Do you want to tell that story? I think we told it. I don't know when we told. Do you want to tell that story?
Well, tell me if I'm saying it right. The Rebbe was in prison and a guard held up a gun to him. And the Rebbe said, your gun doesn't feel me. That's for a person who has only one world. I have two worlds. I think you could say it better than me.
Well, you got the main point, Bubby. The guard was holding the gun to his head and saying, "This little toy has made more." They wanted the Rebbe to speak. I think they wanted him to inform on other Hasidim who had been working with him in the underground, so yeshivas, mikvahs, and things like that. And they said, "This little toy has made many people speak. It will make you speak." He said that little toy affects somebody who has one world and many gods, but I have two worlds and one God, and that little toy doesn't scare me. And he wouldn't tell them whatever it is that they wanted to know from him. And they were so shocked by his answer that they also didn't do anything to him. But I mean, there's many stories of his unswerving focus while he was incarcerated. He wrote about it. There's another book written about it that quotes a lot of his writings. He's a very, very prolific and detailed writer. So like when you read his experience in prison, it's called The Prince in Prison, you feel like you're sitting there next to him experiencing it. It's very horrifying, and not horrifying, like it's not grotesque or anything like that. It's just his emotions. He shares emotions and the way that they treated the prisoners there and how they used all these scare tactics. And he says he made a resolution that he was not ever going to give in to them. As a prisoner, he was never going to give in to them. So like, for example, when they told him that he was freed, or like he said he wasn't going to, he wanted his siddur, his tefillin, his talis. When he was freed, it was Shabbos, and he's not going out because it's Shabbos. Like there's all these things that he just refused to sort of play by their rules. He played by the rules of Torah even while he was in prison, and it was very, and he was brutalized because of it. But it was very telling about him as a person. So somebody who lived through that was not going to be mincing words when he was talking to people in America about what he thought needed to happen. He knew where he was coming from. He knew what the truth needed to be, and he shared it again in a very loving, giving way. I think we've talked about this before. It's a little bit incomprehensible, or maybe a lot incomprehensible, how somebody who was able to bring Yiddishkeit into communist Russia and needed to use those type of strengths and tactics to go against those, like the tyrants, was able to do a complete flip-flop when he came to America and use the carrot, and like talk to them by ways of like, it was complete open freedom here. He had to encourage and inspire the Jewish the Jewry in America in a different way than he had to do it in Russia. It was a completely different circumstances, a completely different society, and switch from that, like fighting the system, to working with the system and encouraging. He created a comic book for children with Jewish themes in it, like stories. These things weren't around in 1940, like comic stories. Or so it's incredible. It's really incredible. He's an incredible person, incredible leader of the Jewish community, and we're very privileged to have these writings to study. But I guess that's just, again, like a perspective on what, on where it's coming from. So, when we say, so we're just saying he did speak in harsh, unrelenting tones, but the overall impression was one of warmth. He radiated joy, inner peace, and fatherly concern. I think fatherly concern is really the main emotion that comes through in all of his writings. As Rebbe Rayatz writes, the Rebbe's door is always open to everyone. His loving smile and shining eyes open the most intimate recesses of your heart, and you eagerly anticipate his words. Standing before the Rebbe, you lose your sense of self, and a feeling of awe and respect envelops you. You feel like you're in a different world, a holier world, in which your day-to-day affairs now seem so trivial and unimportant. You don't know why you feel this way, but you can't deny the fact that even in your first meeting with him, you feel that the Rebbe is a loyal, caring friend. This is the secret of his infinite love for every Jew, regardless of who he is and what his material and spiritual state is. The Rebbe's, I feel like, even though he's talking about a yechidus with the Rebbe, a face-to-face audience with the Rebbe, I feel like that, yes? Yes.
You're breaking up.
Yeah, I don't know what to do.
You're breaking up.
That.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
I don't have anything. Let me see if I can make my phone a hotspot. Okay, I made my phone a hotspot. Let's see if that helps. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. So even though he's describing the feeling that you get when you're in the Rebbe's room for yechidus, for a private audience, face to face, I feel like a lot of that comes through in his writings as well. Like you get that feeling from learning the Rebbe's teachings as well. And now this is the chassid again, going back to describe his experience in that face-to-face yechidus, private audience. The Rebbe's room is a world unto itself, a world of pure truth and regal holiness. You are compelled to lose your sense of self, and the Rebbe's clear, brief, and precise words warm you, opening your eyes and heart. Slumbering souls, enduring in exile in physical bodies, awaken. Isn't that beautiful? Slumbering souls, awaken. A divine magnetic force pulls them to this place. The soul feels at home here. This is its natural habitat. The soul is secure and alert. It asserts itself and sets the tone. Here is the place the soul can envelop itself in holiness. Here it can quench its thirst for a loftier spiritual life, and here it can charge itself with strength to fulfill the divine purpose of the soul's descent into the body. Here the soul sees and feels the present time is the break of dawn of the Jewish redemption. The mood was exalted, all worries and concerns were swept aside, and you completely forgot that you are now in Chicago. You felt and relived the old home with all of its beautiful Jewish and Torah flavor. Isn't that beautiful? That's one chassid sharing his experience of his private audience with the Rebbe. And anytime we learn a teaching of the Rebbe, in some measure, that is also imparted to us. I feel like that also happens when we go to the Ayal. The Rebbe's resting place and the previous Rebbe's resting place, we would have our yearly women to women trip to New York. We didn't have it this fall. But that's also, I think, what women describe happen when they daven at the Ayal. So God willing, we'll be able to do that soon again. A dual focus. The Rebbe reached out to his listeners on two planes simultaneously. On one hand, he was addressing their minds. At the same time, a deeper process of connection was transpiring, as Rebbe Moshe writes, from that same chassid again. The concepts expounded upon are very deep and aren't immediately understood by all, because Chassidus requires preparation and prior knowledge. Like every field of wisdom, it has its basics, principles, and axioms. Yet nevertheless, you feel that every word penetrates the heart and mind, right? Even if you don't understand it completely because you don't have the vernacular and the background and everything else, but like still, it doesn't matter. You still feel like it's saturating you in some level. We've talked about that in class too, right? These words refresh and fan your godly fire. The soul's thirst is quenched, and you are imbued with a new vitality and enthusiasm. This is the special quality of the divine words that speak to your soul beyond your mundane habits. And those are the words of Chassidus. And he's describing that as his experience listening to the teachings of the previous Rebbe. He was one of the people there while the Rebbe was speaking. Not privately. These are just in classes. I'm not even sure. The truth is, I'm not. Beyond immediacy, the Rebbe's talks and discourses left a profound and lasting impression on the Jews of Chicago. That's us. We are still reaping the benefits of that visit spiritually. Years later, the Rebbe's listeners would share their memories of the visit with their children and grandchildren. As one of the members of the Chicago community, Matt Moshe Branstein said, "My father remembered that meeting very fondly. With reverence, he would talk about it as one of the holiest moments of his life, and the impression was something that stayed with him for the rest of his life. This was not an isolated experience, but rather one repeated in countless homes." The response of the Chicago Jewry had a reciprocal effect on the Rebbe Rayatz. When he returned to Brooklyn, he told his son-in-law and eventual successor, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem and to achieve Mesiras Nefesh, one also needs to be worthy. An impact was made there in Chicago far beyond what was expected. And we see Chicago's reaping the benefits still of that visit today. To be accessible for all time. The impression produced by the visit was so powerful that the Hasidim asked to have a record of the Rebbe's talks published as a book. 2 years later, that dream came to fruition. It was called Bikur Chicago. That's what it's called in Hebrew. This is the first time it's been translated, but it was published, and it's been published for many years in Hebrew and in Yiddish. Some of it was in Hebrew and some of it was in Yiddish. When preparing the talks for publication, the Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem and felt somewhat of a conflict. Obviously, he desired to spread the Rebbe Rayatz's teachings. However, he also realized the conceptual gap mentioned by Rebbe Moshe Leib and addressed that issue in a preface which he composed, meaning that some people would not be able to understand it because they didn't have the background. By and large, the sichos should be understandable to everyone, even those who do not have previous familiarity with Chabad teachings. Nevertheless, they do contain concepts, particularly those mentioned parenthetically, that cannot be understood thoroughly without first studying these teachings, or at least knowing the foundations of this approach, which are not necessarily explained in the Sikha, meaning the previous Rebbe is going to be quoting different ideas from Chassidus and just sort of saying them without expounding upon them. The solution the Rebbe proposed was, a person who has a difficulty with an entire concept or a particular issue published in a maamarim of Chassidus should seek an explanation from those who study Chassidus and occupy themselves with it. That echoes a theme emphasized by the Rebbe in his preface to Tanya, and frequently mentioned by the Rebbe. Those seeking to advance their knowledge of Chassidus should seek out a seasoned mentor, a mashpia in Chabad parlance, and draw on his wisdom and enhance their own. So we are hoping to unpack these sichos and maamarim together in this class, and hopefully we will be able to do that. Okay, so now that's like a little bit the background and introduction to the book. You have a question, Bubby? You're muted.
Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You gave me a booklet years ago, I still have. It's something about the Rebbe's visit to Chicago. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's a little booklet. I can see it visually.
It's probably one thing that was translated maybe for like a bar mitzvah or a wedding or something like that. That's what I'm guessing. It's not the whole everything. I don't remember clearly, but like that's what I would think.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to look at it again. I have it out. I thought it might be pertinent. Okay, thank you.
That's what I think it would be. I don't know. I could look at it later. So this comprehensive edition, the publication includes the sichos, that means the talks, delivered by the Rebbe in Chicago. These sichos were translated, by Yari Kaplun. The maamarim delivered by the Rebbe in Chicago. So what's the difference between a sicha and a maamar? So we've talked briefly about it in some classes. I don't remember if we mentioned it here. A sicha is a talk, an explanation, an elaboration on something. A maamar, I think we gave a little bit of an introduction when we did Basilagani, right, is considered actually to be a form of prophecy, like a mini prophecy. It's There's a special nigun, a special song that's sung before the Rebbe will say a mimer. Only a Rebbe can say a mimer. Anybody can give a class, quote unquote, but only a Rebbe can say a mimer. And Hasidim stand while the Rebbe is saying the mimer. The Rebbe usually closes his eyes, and it's a little like a sing song. And there's usually, I mean, you can see a certain sort of light almost on the Rebbe's face while he's doing it. There are videos of the Rebbe saying maamarim, and if you see the video, you'll see what I'm saying. It's like an otherworldly experience, and then the Rebbe says it, and then afterwards it's unpacked and discussed and learned through and so on. So the previous Rebbe said sichos, which are talks and these are like conversations almost. The previous Rebbe sichos here almost sound like conversations, and then the maamarim, the Hasidic discourses, are more of that, like almost like that mini prophecy that we're talking about. So he said both in Chicago, and both of them are included in the book. The maamarim were translated by Moshe Miller. Okay, actually he's from Chicago, and sSoul Super. I know it gives all the different. Previously, my mom were translated into English by Rebbe Shmuel Eliezer Goldsmith from Chhabad, Illinois, under the guidance of Rabbi Daniel Moskowitz. That's probably what you have, Bubby, is the ones that were done earlier. So it includes the Sichos and maamarim, and then the third thing that includes is the Rebbe Rayatz's letter to the banquet held on behalf of the Pidyon Shvum Fund and Yeshivas of Tov Chaitzvimim. Pidyon Shvum means the redemption of captives. So the Rebbe was trying to raise money, as he said, raise money for Jews in Europe to get them out of Europe, as many as they could get out of Europe, to pay for, I don't know, visas or maybe bribes, or whatever they could do to get them out, and also to raise money for the yeshiva system. So this letter was composed by the Rebbe after he was prevented from attending the banquet due to the passing of his mother, Reb Shtar Nassar. It was translated by Reb Shmuel Super. So what happened was that while the previous Rebbe was here, I think we mentioned, while he was in Chicago for the visit, his mother passed away, and there was a banquet here that they were going to be raising funds, and he was going to originally, I think, scheduled to speak at the banquet, but he couldn't go because he was an Einain, right? His mother had passed away. He had to bring her to a burial and Shiva and everything else. He wasn't permitted to go to a banquet gathering, so he wrote a letter to be read on his behalf so that letter's included. An article written by Moshe Leibratzi describing the Rebbe's visit and its impact it left on the Chicago Jewry. So that was also some of that was already quoted in the preface. A treatise by the Rebbe explaining one of the sichos delivered by the Rebbe in Chicago. It appeared in another publication, but it's included here. And the preliminary draft of the Rebbe's publisher for it in Country Speaker Chicago, it also appeared someplace else. An excerpt from Yeshivas Hayoman, the Rebbe's personal diary. It describes the interaction between the Rebbe and the previous Rebbe after his return from Chicago. The Rebbe Rayatz's instructions regarding the funeral and burial of his mother, Rebbe Shtar Nassar, and the mourning practices he followed afterwards. So all of these were edited and prepared for publication by the staff of Sichos in English. So that's like what we're about to do. It's a collection of all of these things. It's not one long thing like we've been doing until now. So now it tells a little bit about the history of Chabad in Chicago. So we're in Chicago. I think it's interesting to go through this quickly. As mentioned above, the visit of the Rebbe Rayatz impacted Chicago Jewry powerfully. Beyond the direct impression he left on people whom he addressed and with whom he met, his visit imparted a spiritual potential that continued to influence the city and its residents. As explained in many Hasidic sources, the Tzaddik's visit to a place generates an aura of holiness that remains even after he departs. In the years following the visit of the Rebbe Rayatz, several Lubavitcher rabbis and prominent Hasidim, together with their wives, dedicated themselves to nurturing the influence the Rebbe imparted. Among the rabbinic leaders who served the Chabad Lubavitch community impacted Chicago and Jewry were Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Hecht and Rabbi Tzvi Schusterman. They and their wives, Rabbi Chaya Epstein and Rabbi Chava Schusterman, imparted Hasidic vibrancy, warmth, and depth to the Jews of the city. They were the original, I got a little slower. They were the original shluchim of the previous Rebbe to Chicago, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Hecht and Rabbi Schusterman. They've both since passed away, but they were the original emissaries of Chabad to Chicago. In 1976, the Rebbe sent Rabbi Daniel Moskowitz and his wife Esther Rachel as his shluchim to Chicago for almost 40 years until his untimely passing on the 2nd of Adar in 2014. Rabbi Moskowitz' capable and energetic leadership cultivated the seeds the Rebbe Rayatz planted, making Lubavitch Chabad a dynamic force throughout the Jewish community of Chicago and creating a network of Chabad houses and institutions that serve the needs of Illinois as a whole. So many people on this call have met Rabbi Moskowitz and know him, and I don't know if anybody here, yeah, some people here also met Rabbi Schusterman, Alva Shalom, and the Chabad houses around Chicago obviously are from Rabbi Hecht, bringing Rabbi Moskowitz, opening Chabad houses, and many more have been opened since 2014. And Meisters Chinuch Cheder, the boys' Masifta, the girls' high school, all of these institutions are really basically from the previous Rebbe's visit through the channels of Rabbi Hecht, Rabbi Schusterman, Rabbi Moskowitz, and the Shlochim that are here today, continuing that legacy. Chicago is known as the windy city. It is our hope that the publication and sichos and study of these sichos, maamarim, these talks and Hasidic discourses will hasten the fulfillment of the prophecy. The wind will carry them all away, a breath will take them, but he who puts his trust in me will possess the land and shall inherit my holy mountain. One shall say, pave it, prepare the way, take up the stumbling block from the way of my people so that it can proceed to the ultimate redemption led by Mashiach. Amen. There's a footnote that's also very emotional, as is emotional for anybody who knows Rabbi Moskowitz, who passed away recently, and Rabbi Schusterman as well. The signer, this is published by Sichos in English, but it's usually Yonah Afson who was signing Sichos in English. This is Shmuel Afson. So we should pay tribute to Yonah Afson, who was really the founder of Sichos in English. And all the Sichos in English are translated for everybody to read in English are really due to him and his colleagues. So when signing this, Reb Shmuel Afson is saying, I was overcome by emotion, for this was the responsibility of my father, Rabbi Yonah ben Meir, who recently passed away a year ago. As dwarfs stand on the shoulders of giants, I, my family, or 2 years ago, I guess. As dwarfs standing on the shoulders of a giant, I, my family, and the staff of Sichos in English are continuing the mission to which he dedicated his life, spreading the teachings of the Rebbeim outward and making them available to the full spectrum of Jewry. His goal and ours was and is to continue these efforts until and after we become worthy of the fulfillment of the promise given to the Baal Shem Tov by Mashiach, that he will come, redeem our people, and lead us to the dawning of an age when those who repose in the dust shall arise and sing joyous praises. So the Sefer was printed by Lubavitch Chabad of Illinois. The funding came from Lubavitch Chabad of Illinois in memory of Rabbi Hecht, Rabbi Moskowitz. I mean, there's in the back, I think it says all the dedications, and in honor of the beginning, community members, some of whom everybody probably knows. So you could read that. But that was, so that's a little bit, that's like an introduction to the Sefer. If you turn to the next page, it shows like a diary of the Rebbe's visit. I just think it's just so that we have a background of what we're talking about. It's worth sort of reading it through. It's a timeline. It's the timeline. So this is winter of 5702. That's 1942. So Friday, Erev Shabbos, Parsha Shmos, the 20th of Teves, a delegation arrives from Chicago to officially invite the Rebbe to visit Chicago and discuss the details of the visit. He had agreed to go, but this is, hi Zadie, but this is when they the official delegation. Shabbos, the 21st of Teves, many Tmimim and Anash, that means people, Bachar who study in the yeshiva and Chabad community members come to the Shabbos day meal, and the Rebbe spoke words of Torah and inspiration to divine service for a few hours. This is still in New York, but it's included because it's part of that visit to Chicago. So this is still included. Motzei Shabbos, the Rebbe travels from New York to Chicago. That's the 7th of Shvat, a couple of weeks later. Sunday, the 7th of Shvat, the Rebbe arrives in Chicago. He came by train, I believe. 8 p.m., a large crowd gathers at the hotel hall. The Rebbe enters the hall and delivers the maamar called the Tach Bashem Basei Toiv. So we'll get to that, God willing. Monday, the 8th of Shvat in the morning, a number of copies of the maamarim are published and it's studied in groups. A select group of rabbis visits the Rebbe, and we have the notes of his talk with those rabbis, like what he tells them. Part of that is what we saw in the introduction about making sure that the teachings are in the hands of people who are God-fearing. And then Monday, the 8th of Shvat through Friday, the 12th of Shvat, representatives of different institutions from Chicago and the surrounding area visit the Rebbe. Private individuals visit and are granted yichidos, that means a private audience. Representatives of the press visit. So that's part of that. And then Tuesday night, the 9th of Shvat, the members of Merkas HaRabbanim visit the Rebbe. That's a group of Rabbanim in Chicago. A meeting is held with them concerning the state of Judaism in Chicago and organizing efforts to strengthen Torah and religion. So that's like with the group of rabbis, basically. Wednesday, the 10th of Shvat, which is the yahrzeit of his grandmother, and also we remember wound up becoming his own yahrzeit 8 years after this. The Rebbe delivers a maamar entitled Ein Eindim L'Spal El Mitech Chayvid Reish in the memory of his grandmother. Wednesday night, the 11th of Shvat, school children visit with their teachers and synagogue representatives visit the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe. And then Shabbos Parshas B'Shalach on the 13th of Shvat, during the daytime meal, the Rebbe delivers sichos on maamarim entitled Shechara Ani V'Nava. That's on Shabbos. That Shabbos, the 13th of Shvat, his mother passes away in New York, but he doesn't get the notification until after Shabbos. But she passed away on Shabbos, the 13th of Shvat. Motzei Shabbos, the 14th of Shvat, news arrives of the passing of Rebbe Stern Sarah. Preparations are made to return immediately to New York. Representatives of the Rabbanim implore the Rebbe to delay his departure to the next day, and the Rebbe accedes to their request. I guess it was probably snowing and the weather and it was dark and night and everything, and they asked him to stay over and leave the next day, which he did. On Sunday, the 14th of Shvat, a banquet is held on behalf of the Pidyon Shvum Fund and the Yeshivas of Tomchei Tzvimim. That's the trying to release the captives and raise money for the yeshivas. And the Rebbe is not present, right, because he's now in mourning, so he can't go to this. But the Rebbe's letter, written by his secretary and unsigned due to the time of mourning, is read publicly and makes a strong impression. And then that afternoon, that's on the afternoon, the Rebbe departs Chicago, and Monday morning, the Rebbe arrives in New York and to oversee the burial of his mother. So that's the Rebbe and Stern encouraged the Rebbe to go to Chicago, even though she was not feeling well at the time, but she encouraged him to go. Who knows if she knew what was going to happen or not, but she did encourage him to go, even though he was hesitant because of her health. So that's like an overview of the visit and of what we're sort of gonna what we're gonna be able to study together. So I have a question. This is like an introduction. I don't know if people have any questions now. Do you have any questions? You have to unmute, Nancy, you're muted.
What's Anish? The Anish community?
Anash is an acronym for Anshe Shlomeinu, which means like our community, basically.
Oh, excuse me. Okay.
So like it's an acronym that's used to describe members of the Chabad community, describe each other that way.
I remember Rebbe, the Schustermans.
Rebbe Schusterman, sure.
Yeah, sure. And yeah. Nice memories.
It was a very great man, a very, very
And his
regal
wife.
rabbi.
Was he in B'nai Reuven?
Yes, the B'nai Reuven, yeah.
Yeah, I think he bar mitzvahed my son.
It's quite possible.
That's right.
Yeah, quite possible.
Yeah,
The very
Chabad house in Highland Park didn't have a synagogue at the time.
Yeah. Yep. Very likely. He was a very well respected rabbi, and known in a much larger area than Chicago. Saying was
was a rabbi's rabbi, or whatever that. And he was very regal bearing. He had a very regal bearing.
It's not there now. There was a synagogue in East Rogers Park, and it was in a house, and it was a lot of the Chabad, some of the Chabad community.
The Nusachari synagogue.
Yeah, it was on Paulina.
Yeah.
In East Rogers Park, and I remember it was in a house.
Yeah.
And I think they moved everything, the Torah, everything into the nursing home on Sheridan Road.
Yeah.
And they,
yeah, I know what you're talking about. I can't think of the name of it now. Right. Yeah.
He was still going to that show.
Yeah, Dr. Lubin, right? That's where he walks every Shabbos. Yeah. Okay, so this is I don't know if there's any other questions. This is you have a question, Carolyn?
Yeah, when the Rebbe came over from Europe, did he come with his whole family? So his mother, or did his mother come earlier? A little,
So he came over. He came over with his daughters. He had 3 daughters. 2 daughters came with him. 1 daughter we said was killed by the Nazis, and Treblinka with her husband. So he came with his 2 daughters. I believe he came with his mother. His daughter, Rebbe Chaimoshka, who was going to marry the Rebbe, they were engaged at the time. They weren't married yet, and he was allowed to leave with his immediate family, and he listed the Rebbe as part of his immediate family, but they weren't married yet, and the authorities didn't want to let him take the Rebbe out of Russia with him when he was leaving Russia. He went to Riga, Latvia, and then there to Poland, and then from there to America. So when he was leaving Russia under the communists, he needed to get that leaving. He listed his mother and the Rebbe came. He listed that he wanted to take the Rebbe, and they didn't want to let him. And they said, "Oh, you can, they're not married. You can find another son-in-law you can find another person for your daughter to marry." And he said, "A son-in-law like this is hard to find." So they allowed him to take the Rebbe out. The Rebbe and the Rebbetzin were not together with the previous Rebbe. They were in France during the war. They were in Germany and in France, in Berlin, and then Paris, and then Nice. So he came to America from Warsaw, from Poland, and they joined in America a little bit later, a few months later. They escaped from Nice as the Nazis invaded France. They traveled south the way that many Jews did. But his mother, I believe, was with him the whole time. But I would have to look that up to be sure. I'm not 100% sure. There are records of this, and there's actually a story about the previous Rebbe's being rescued from Poland. Actually, a Nazi officer helped the Rebbe to escape. Actually, if you could believe that. I think the book is called Rescued from the Reich. I believe that's what the book is called. Rescued from the Reich. Yeah, is the story of how the previous Rebbe escaped Europe. Yes, very fascinating. Very, very fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of history here. For people who are interested in history, there's a lot of history here. Might actually be an interesting book for the book club. One of our book club books.
What's the book called again?
Is that Rescued from the Reich? Is that what it's called? Who wrote it, Myrna?
Rescued from the Reich.
Brian Mark Rigg.
Who?
Brian Mark Rigg, R-I-G-G.
Can you see it?
Yeah, Brian Mark Rigg, Rescued from the Reich. The very fascinating story about how the previous Rebbe was rescued.
I think I got it on Amazon.
It's like everything else. Why should that be different than anything else these days? Anyway, I think we should end here, even though I don't like to waste class time, but I feel like this is like an introduction, and to start the Sikha and do two paragraphs, and then, start next week and redo it. This is like an introduction, and then we can actually start the first Sikha, God willing, next week. And again, if anybody still needs to get the book, you can order it on Amazon, I think. But I'm not sure if you can get it on Amazon. You can order it through Kahas. That's the website that I put it. I don't think it's on Amazon yet. Or I have a couple of them in my house still. Okay.
Thank you.
Very
Thank you.
good. Have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
week,
It's so
everybody.
nice
Thank you,
to
Chaya.
meet you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Be well. Be well. Yeah.
Well.
Okay.
Thank you.